Hey everyone, so we all heard the story of Adam and Eve in the garden and how the serpent beguiled Eve into temptation and sinning against God, which consequently caused the fall of humanity. But I have a question. Why was Eve not surprised when an animal such as a snake was talking to her? Some theologians have tried to explain this phenomenon by arguing that all animals could talk in Eden. There's no precedence for such a belief in the Bible, however. Traditionally, Christians have said that the serpent was a literal snake through which Satan was working, and I definitely agree Satan was involved. However, in this video I will argue for a different perspective on who and what the serpent actually was. Okay? Now, let me just clarify the title of this video. By divine being, I'm not saying that the serpent was God or on the same level as God. I believe he was subservient to God. Nor do I mean divine being in the sense that he was a morally good being, as some Gnostics teach. You can understand the term divine being to mean heavenly or spiritual being, if you'd prefer. So, in other words, as an angel. Okay? And it is my belief that this serpent in the garden was the original rebel who disobeyed God and started a proxy war between God and his divine beings / angels and Satan and his allies. And we get glimpses of this war in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. But I won't go into that topic very far in this video because that's not the point of it. But I do plan to explore it further in a different video, so stay tuned for that. So the theory I'm putting forth is that the serpent was not a literal snake, but a divine being who may have had serpentine features such as scales on his skin in his appearance. And throughout this video I will be referring to the Bible scholar Dr. Michael Heiser, since this interpretation has largely been popularized by him. This theory is based on a different understanding of the word for serpent. The word translated as serpent is nachesh in Hebrew, and there are three different things it can mean. There are two nouns it can mean. Serpent and snake is one of them, and the other is diviner. And a diviner is someone who foretells the oracles of God on his behalf. So in the Nachesh's case, he would have been a false diviner. And then there is a third meaning, an adjective, which is brazen, as in brazen copper, or bronze. And I believe the author of Genesis could have had all three denotations in mind when writing about the Nachesh. Now, many Bible scholars believe Isaiah chapter 14 and Ezekiel chapter 28 to be either directly or alluding to the original rebel in the garden. Therefore, we can glean additional information about him from there. However, if you don't think it's possible that Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 could possibly be pointing to the events in the garden, then you're probably not going to adopt this interpretation. Nevertheless, I would like you to continue watching and perhaps you may be persuaded. Listen to the arguments. Now I'm going to give you a quote from Dr. Michael Heiser because he is a Hebrew and Semitic language scholar. Well, I'm not. And he says, "In Hebrew grammar, it is not unusual for an adjective to be converted for use as a noun. The proper word is substantivized. A common example would be Holy One, with or without the article. If we take nachesh deriving from the adjective rather than as a noun, the translation becomes the Shining One, which is quite in concert with descriptions of the Satan figure in the Old Testament. For example, in Isaiah 14:12-15, he is called Helel ben Shachah, the Shining One, son of the dawn. Elsewhere, divine beings are described as shining or luminous, even by use of the adjective nachesh. For example, Daniel 10:4. Now on the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted my eyes and looked, And behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze, ne choshet, in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. So here, Michael Heiser makes the argument that based on Hebrew grammar, the adjective nachesh can be understood as shining one, and he gave some examples for that. Now, my own observation is that the nachesh is described as son of dawn, the shining one, in Isaiah 14, arrayed with gems in Ezekiel 28, and as brazen or bronze in Genesis 3. And all three descriptions point to him being shiny and bright, a divine being. And therefore, Eve wasn't surprised when a shiny divine being started talking to her rather than a snake, since she would have been used to seeing angels alongside God in the garden. Michael Heiser believes that the fall of Satan occurred right then and there in Genesis 3. If we compare the judgment language of Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 with the curse of the serpent in Genesis 3, we can clearly see some similarities. Okay, let's have a look at it. I have my Bible here, and let's read together. First, we'll read the curse of the serpent in Genesis 3. The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock, and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat, all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." We all remember this passage, right? And ultimately, the offspring of Eve would lead to Jesus Christ, who destroyed Satan on the cross. But who is the offspring of the serpent? Well, they could be fellow fallen divine beings, such as the one in Genesis 6. You can see my video on that topic. Or human offspring who aligned themselves with Satan. And Jesus affirmed the latter definition in John chapter 8, verse 44, when he called the religious hypocrites vipers and said to them, "You are of your father the devil." And one more thing, snakes don't eat dust. The language being used here is meant metaphorically. It is a humiliating image. Okay? Now let's compare what we just read with Isaiah 14. "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn, how you are cut down to the ground." Notice, cut down to the ground. "You who laid the nations low, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit." Here we learn Satan's motives. He was ambitious and wanted to elevate himself above God. And as a result, he was cast to the ground. And the word there for ground is eret in the Hebrew, which can also be understood as earth. And his domain would be Sheol, or the underworld. And let's go to Ezekiel 28, verses 14 to 16. "You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of fire you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created, till unrighteousness was found in you. In the abundance of your trade you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O guardian cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire." Here we see the Nachesh was a guardian cherub. And what was he guarding? Well, likely the throne of God, since that is the usual role of cherubs in the Bible. So this cherub, the original rebel, was in the highest position once upon a time, and he rebelled against God, and as a result, he went from the highest position to the lowest position, down into Sheol. He would essentially become the Lord of the Dead. So, in conclusion, Nachesh can have 3 different meanings, and I find it plausible that the author of Genesis could have been alluding to all 3 meanings simultaneously. And I think it makes more sense for the Nachesh not to have been a literal snake, but a divine being, one of the sons of God, who may have looked serpentine in appearance, but was most certainly not a literal snake. This Shining One decided to rebel against God and incited his human creation to disobey and sin against God by telling them lies. And as a result of his rebellion, he was cast from the mountain of God, Eden, and forced to live in the underworld, becoming the Lord of the Dead. Now, my intention in making this video was simply to widen your horizon, to introduce a different, viable interpretation of what the serpent actually was. You don't have to agree with me, you don't have to accept it if it doesn't make sense to you. Let me clarify, this is not a salvific issue, and we can agree to disagree, okay? And one last thing I'll say, as an interesting side note, one translation, the ISV, International Standard Version, has incorporated this rendering of Nachesh as the Shining One into the running text. So when you read the ISV, it literally says the Shining One instead of the serpent. So props to you, ISV. So that's it. Thank you guys for watching. God bless you all, and bye bye.